it's not over yet. We will discover that the world of tomorrow is very much also the world of the past. And the narratives we need to have with us into the world of tomorrow are very much based on a proper understanding of the past. And the two last speakers today, who will first give each of them a speech, followed by a few questions from me, and then a discussion together at the very end. They represent what's east of us. Because east of where we're sitting is the 1,340-kilometer long border. The longest border that exists between NATO and Russia. The longest border that exists between the European Union and Russia. This is what we sometimes call the eastern flank of NATO, or the central front line. If not, I mean, the central front line is in Ukraine. But this is where we... And this movement, this position, is in a way illustrated by the two voices we will hear. That's not how it's structured, because they're writers. So they will talk from their heart, from their writing, from their observing. It's not a duet, but it represents this 1,340 kilometers long border. And now I leave the floor to Rosa Liksom, one of Finland's most exciting writers, and you will hear why.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I decided to address two questions that continue to puzzle me. What can literature do to dismantle structures of violence? And why do we still need the peace movement? My interest in peace and ecological issues and dismantling structures of violence stems from my own experiences. Until I moved away from home at the age of 15, I lived in a household where the war traumas of men who had fought on the front line during the Second World War and during the Lapland War were daily concrete presence. Men who had been mentally broken at the front vented their anxiety and rage at home. Their rage affected on humans, other species, and surrounding nature. The operating models of aggression and violence internalized in wars, intertwined with silence, passes from generation to the next. Today, the results of these operating models can be seen as clear-cut forest, drained swamps, open-pit mines, and polluted waterways. Traumas left by wars are familiar to many Finns. Having lived through this, I joined the anti-Vietnam War movement while still in the secondary school, and later became involved in the peace and environmental movements during the high school. Jean-Paul Sartre, the philosopher that survived the horrors of the Second World War, demanded his contemporaries especially authors, to take a look in the mirror. He demands committed literature, not to tame the authors to be servants of political tendencies, but to get people encounter the total degradation of the Western civilization and the complete decadence of enlightenment in the heart of Europe after Auschwitz with honesty. When we look at the world today, we can ask how far we have got from the post-war decadence. In 1955, when the United States had destroyed 10 years previously the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki with nuclear bombs in Japan, the philosopher Bernard Russell published a petition against nuclear weapons. The most famous person who signed the manifest was the physicist Albert Einstein. The central part of the petition is this. Here then is the problem which we present to you, stark, dreadful, and inescapable. Shall we put end to the human race, or shall mankind renounce war? When Finland joined the world's biggest military alliance, NATO, in 2023, our leaders emphasized that the deterrence of NATO is precisely based on nuclear weapons. Now that Finland is a member of NATO and the placement of the nuclear weapons is not considered impossible anymore, the politicians have started to use the term nuclear shield. The balance of terror maintained by the shield does not take into account the fact that in nuclear war, entire nations, animals, forests, water systems, and the air we breathe will be destroyed. The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons of the United Nations that came into effect in January 2021 aims at that. None of the countries that have nuclear weapons or is a member of NATO, Finland included, has not signed the agreement. United States, Israel, Russia, Pakistan, India, even leaders in Germany, France, and Great Britain have recently raised the possibility of limited nuclear war. We all know that the nuclear war would cause radical climate disruption and global starvation. It will be the end of civilization. The only way to prevent nuclear war is the complete destruction of nuclear weapons. US Republican President Eisenhower warned as early as 1961 about the dangers of the growth of the military-industrial complex. He meant the military, political and economic power are strongly intertwined together and form a threat to peace and democracy. We have ended up living in the time that President Eisenhower wanted us about. Militarization and everyday talk about security and defense is also stripping away democracy and giving power to military forces. Now I have to take a little bit of water. According to the war researcher Susanna Hast, violence originates in language. It is conceptualized, strategized, and initiated through discourse. The use of terminology such as referring war as a conflict, fight against terrorism, or the liberalization of territories serves to obscure the true nature of events. Once war has brought into everyday language, fighting becomes a natural extension of our words. We also live in a time when the world order created after World War II is falling apart. World's leading powers are breaking away or have broken away from democracy. We can ask ourselves what we have learned from the wars, what we have learned from history in general. All actions we do here on our planet have a global impact, and we need global institutions to solve these. Global institutions which are currently treated with disintegration by many powers. Acting in peace and ecological movement is nowadays seen as an idealistic delirium from the past. In fact, the peace and the ecological movement might be needed more than ever. They are needed to remind that there is a choice for militarism. There is a choice for vast ecological destruction. There is a choice for eco-wars. These movements are needed to demand following and developing international justice, promoting and building of demilitarized zones, and destruction of nuclear weapons. These movements are needed to demand maintaining the belief in world peace and non-violent actions in these movements. We need also peace and ecological movement for building the kind of communication with respect the democratic society. It is good to remember that every person's contribution to the peace movement and ecological action that will help in this process is meaningful. Because many of the changes start from small movements, tiny streams that form a big river. For example, the civil movement against the Vietnam War, the courage to resist one of the biggest colonialist powers of country's pacifistic movement have changed the course of history in an important way. Today, people's movements such as Elokapina, the Finnish branch of Extinction Rebellion, the global climate movement, environmental and peace movements, Stop Ecocide movement, sustainability elders for the planet, and feminist scholars of militarism act as a counterforce to destruction. If we take into account that the current emission from warfare and the militaristic industrial complex are among the most destructive to the environment in the world, as a committed author, I aim to uncover the roots of violence and illustrate how literature can actively contribute to finding a counterbalance. My focus is on reshaping the narrative of a human being who champions militarism and survival of fittest, reconceptualizing their existence within the broader web of life that includes all species. Although the setting of my novels used to be historical, their writing has been motivated by burning questions of today. How to share experience of violence and exclusion through literature. How to rewrite man and his place in the nature and among other species. How to find a living connection to the layers of our existence that human-centered modernism had tragically lost over the past centuries. How to blend the literature narrative to reveal a simple truth that we have stubbornly denied for a long time. Nature does not need man, but man needs nature to live. As an art historian, Anita Seppä emphasized, we live at a pivotal moment in history when the power to redefine our future still lies within our grasp. The green transition is not sustainable if we do not swiftly connect environmental efforts with long-term peace building and diplomacy. This endeavor necessitates radically new ways of envisioning the world within and around us. Literature and arts play a critical role in this essential reimagining process. The time to start this transformative work is today. Ladies and gentlemen, peace is power. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Rosa.
Thank you.
Thank you also for finding new ways of repeating, I mean, a tradition that started with Berta von Suttner and her reactions to the militarism of her times, and trying to find, and she was also trying to describe the mechanisms of how militarism escalates. But if we try looking practically into you and your writing, because as I started by saying, that the world of the future is very much shaped by the narratives of the past, and also how we understand war, when we envision defense or defending our country, it's shaped by how we understand war. And for example, your latest novel, in Swedish Älven, in Finnish Väylä, no?
Väylä. And English, the river.
It's a very specific river, and it takes us north.
Yes.
Because also, I mean, we can say that, you know, maybe Finland's history in World War II is not as widely known as other chapters of World War II. But also within Finland and within the Nordic countries, there's a special narrative of the North that's not always widely known. And this has been your focus, right? So how would you say that, I mean, all these words that you gave in your peace speech, how does this become writing for you?
One reason why the Lapland War is ignored is because Lapland used to be wasteland.
Maybe we should say what the Lapland War is, just so that everyone chronologically... So after the Winter War, there was a continuation war. And after the continuation war, there was a Lapland War.
Yeah.
So let's start there.
Okay, so let's say so that Lapland War was a very peculiar war because we fought with Germans, Nazi Germans. And when I'm abroad, so people have very difficult to understand that how you can fight with Germans and you don't have any border to Germany. But it happened because during the whole Second World War, we had more than 200,000 German soldiers living in Lapland, also in my home village. And when Finland made a peace agreement with the Soviet Union, so one part of that peace agreement was that German soldiers have to go away from Lapland. And
that is to Norway.
Yeah, to the boats waiting for them in the Arctic Sea. That didn't happen, and so began the war between Finland and Germany in Lapland, and it was so bloody war because Finnish army sent it to the front in Lapland, boys like 15, 16 years old, and they got only 2 weeks training how to shoot on the front line. And Germans were very, very well educated war heroes, Alp soldiers.
Veterans of the former wars.
So all these boys died. It was a terrible experience, for example, in my village, because the older boys died on the Eastern Front, younger boys died against Germany, and so on. And I have
it also brought enormous destruction to nature, right?
Yes, yes, it was a terrible war in any way, because when the Germans went away, they burnt everything.
Villages,
all the houses,
forests,
villages, forests, everything. And 100,000 mines they put into the nature. And we can still find these landmines, still. Every summer we can find 1-2 landmines. And hundreds, thousands of reindeers has died when they, and bears and whatever animals when they tramp on these mines. But anyway, so this was the picture, which is very familiar to me because my parents, especially my mother, went with cows to Sweden because the idea was that all the civilians with cows have to move to Sweden over the Tornio River because army and the people in power in Finland, they knew that that German will use this method of burning everything when they go away. And that was one idea to get rid of this mass slaughter of civilians. So my mother went with cows from my home village for 4 weeks, walking with cows. It was raining. It was late autumn, so it was raining and then it was snow. With cows to Sweden and looking for a refugee camp to live. And when I was young, so my mother, when I asked about this time in refugee camp in Sweden and all this way to Sweden, so she always said everything was fine. Everything was like it went so easily, and because she didn't want to tell about it. And this is the case concerning every person who was who had to go to Sweden and who had to live in these refugee camps like many months. There were a lot of people who lived all winter long there. And all these facilities in these camps were very limited, let's say so. But also when my mother was like 80 years old, and also her sisters, she had 8 sisters, they were all also living in different camps in Sweden. So they begin to tell about it, how it really was. And it was not a beautiful story. There was like sexual abuse on the way and harassment on the way. There was different kind of things. And a lot of children died during that winter in these camps. And a lot of senior persons died. And one of the very difficult thing to Finnish people or Laplanders was that they have to bury these relatives, close relatives in Sweden. And after war, they knew that they can't go there to take care of these graves. Okay.
Rosa, but coming up, I mean, no, because I mean, it is an extremely interesting history because it's. I mean, I can assert as a Swede that the Lapland War. I mean, yes, people know that it existed, but it's really not described, and also in general the Arctic. The Arctic World War II is not always very known, but why was this important for you to describe in the book? I mean, what would you? I mean, in terms of narrative, just in a few sentences. I mean, what would you like me reading the book to take with me?
I don't have answer to that, but I can say why I began to write this book and work with this part of history. In fact, I had idea. I wanted to write a novel where I can describe a close relation between human being and other species. I have been born in a house with a lot of different kind of species and in the middle of forest. So I know, I have my own experiences how you can really live together with other species, and also you can live part of the nature. I have experienced it, and also my mother, and then I realized that this Lapland war, when the civilians had to start this long hiking to Swedish refugee camps. So it was just like match in heaven, because I had my mother, I had these cows, and I had all this journey, what she did. And my mother was a person who really lived as a part of the nature. And also my father and grandparents. If I think situation that I travel with them with a time machine to Stone Age. So these, my parents and my grandparents, can live totally in these circumstances during the Stone Age. So
it's time for us to wrap up this session. I will ask you to wait until I invite you back on stage.
Yeah, thank you.
Rosa, we will continue in a moment.
Thank you for you. It was my pleasure to have this opportunity to speak about peace and environmental movements. Thank you.
Thank you. And our second speaker is a Russian writer, Sergei Lebedev, who lives in Potsdam since many years in Germany. And I mean, full disclosure, a close personal friend, and a voice that at least I always go back to. Because I think we need to understand, I mean, there are many voices coming from Russia. I always claim that since the full-scale invasion, there is no room for business as usual when it comes to how we look at Russia, how we describe Russia, what we publish, what we translate. What the Ukrainians are facing is forcing us to leave everything that's business as usual. We need to find new ways, new understanding. But we need to understand. Because if we maintain the image of something that we're just projecting and not fully understanding, we're creating a monster that we're just fearing, but we cannot do anything with it. So it's my great pleasure to introduce the next speaker, Sergei Lebedev.
Being Russian and digging into Russia's past almost my whole life, attempting to expose the roots of the destruction my country brought into the world, I think it's only appropriate for me to speak up from this perspective, to try to understand what was fatally overlooked. We often hear that Russia's inability or unwillingness to deal with the crimes of its own past, to take responsibility and restore justice, has led to the restoration of tyranny and the military aggression. Such narrative usually focuses only on internal Soviet deeds, forced collectivization, the Great Terror of the 30s, the Gulag system, and so on. Some of these things were nominally recognized as crimes, but no attempt was made to hold the perpetrators to account. Russia's perestroika Democrats were generally opposed to any substantial lustration or other measures of transitional justice. But I would dare to say that the most politically sensitive Soviet crime is and was nearly always left out of the discussion. And Russia's failure to address this particular crime is far more dangerous and one that affects the fate of many nations. This crime is the Soviet occupation of Central and Eastern Europe, which lasted for decades, resulted in many dead and arrested, the destruction of social and cultural life, and then freedom. The gravity of injustice was immense. Internal Soviet crimes, which went unpunished, were at least legally admitted as crimes. External aggression and occupation were not, and even Russian dissidents and liberals never seriously risked raising this issue in legal terms. This is why, in relation to Central and Eastern Europe, there are two concepts of memory and history that normally cannot coexist, that clash and contradict each other. They are totally opposed. They cannot be reconciled by any diplomacy. That is Soviet liberation versus Soviet occupation. It was only when Soviet troops finally withdrew from Eastern and Central Europe 45 years after the end of the World War II that the true liberation came, when the Soviet Union collapsed and occupied nations found their way to independence. But it was easier to restore or establish statehood and independence than to achieve the sovereignty of historical memory. The progressive image of the late Soviet Union, the high hopes of the moment, shielded Moscow from serious criticisms and accusations related to the occupation. This restraint was the result of a surfeit of trust, or maybe just a cautionary pragmatism, the desire not to irritate Moscow and undermine its goodwill, not to burden the losers of the Cold War too much. But the most important protection Moscow enjoyed was, of course, based on the status of being a victor over Nazism. Russia, as a self-proclaimed successor state to the USSR, has built its international political profile on the Soviet liberation myth, which provides moral capital and prescribes to the former occupied territories a debt and gratitude for their liberation. This narrative has depicted Russia as the main victim of German aggression, and it has reinforced by the international dignitaries who have attended the anniversary celebrations in Moscow throughout the years. Yes, the Soviet losses were real, and it's yet truly tragic that these losses helped to subjugate nations longing for freedom, to replace one dictatorship with another. The Soviet soldier whose statues still mark the landscape of Europe from Berlin to Sofia was not a liberator. And no amount of blood shed by Soviets to defeat the Nazis can excuse the Soviet own role as occupiers. It is not accidental that the Soviets were so reluctant to recognize even the very existence of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. In modern Russia, to make any equivalence between the roles of the USSR and the Nazis is criminalized. In 1939 and in 1940, the Soviet Union occupied Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia, the parts of Poland, Finland and Romania. For 22 months, it was a faithful ally of the Nazi Germany. This first wave of Soviet occupations can in no way be disguised as a struggle against the Nazism, and it reveals the real intention of the Soviets. What then followed was in fact a geographically extended reoccupation. This was a separate aim of the war, not necessarily connected to one to defeat the Nazis. Unfortunately, such understanding of the Soviet occupation as a crime has not become a tantamount part of European history. It is geographically limited to the East, blurred, insufficiently represented, remaining a part of national histories, and not forming a powerful international narrative shared across the continent. Yet, this understanding has a profound bearing on modern European life, and it is a key to European security. Only when you fully grasp the cruelty of the consequences of the Soviet occupation can you comprehend the concerns of Russia's closest neighbors, their historically grounded fears, and their need for safety. Eastern regions of Ukraine are currently occupied by Russian troops. For the first time since 1989, extremely large areas of the European continent, home to millions of people, are under the total control of the invading states. But it seems that too many Europeans had already forgotten what this particular type of occupation means. The current occupation zone is a black hole for media. The recent case of Ukrainian journalist Victoria Roshina, who tried to report on the grim reality of the occupied territories and was tortured to death by Russian state security units, is evidence for this. But what we do know is enough to draw a direct comparison with the brutality of the early Soviet occupation of Eastern Europe. Russian citizenship is being forcibly imposed. In fact, this is a mass expulsion program, because those who do not agree will be treated as foreigners and forced to leave. It signals that Russia is pursuing the same path as the USSR did, for example, in relation to the Baltic states, aiming to Russify the conquered region, rearrange its national composition, and make it a part of its states. Property is being confiscated. Settlers are brought to form the backbone of the occupation regime. The politics of memory is reversed. Monuments marking Soviet crimes disappear. Streets are given back their Soviet names as a symbol of Russian domination. All this is a part of the attack on national identity, an attempt to erase it. The Russian state security services use so-called filtration techniques extensively, and anyone deemed politically unreliable can be imprisoned. Severe torture and sexualized violence are widespread. Ukrainian prisoners of war released from captivity report the same torture, abuse, and deliberate malnutrition, aimed at breaking them physically and mentally. Anyone who knows the history behind the Iron Curtain immediately recognizes the pattern. All this was a grim reality for Poland and Lithuania, East Germany and Romania, and others. Mass deportations, the brutal rule of the secret police, deprivation of property and civil rights. But it never became a real stigma for the USSR and later Russia. It never became something of which a nation is ashamed, something that demands justice and punishment, acknowledgement and atonement. And this is where we are now. The occupier is back. And the occupier wages the war exactly like the Soviets did. Here, I have another story to share. It is as important as an exemplary case as a personal confession and admission of responsibility. My step-grandfather was a soldier in the Soviet army that invaded Finland in 1939. My mother witnessed him talking about his deeds. She had memorized one particular story of his, told in a low and dispassionate voice. He talked about the granite hill on which there was a small concrete pillbox, strategically very well placed. Deep swamps to the left and to the right, unfrozen despite the harsh cold, gave Soviets no place for maneuver. A Finnish machine gun crew inside the pillbox repelled several infantry attacks. The Soviets retreated, leaving dead and wounded on the icy and slippery slope. Their commander requested support. After a while, a Soviet tank appeared. It tried to drive up to the hill for the direct shot, but its caterpillar slipped on the icy granite. It was stuck halfway up. A Soviet infantry sergeant, former lumberjack, ordered his sprawled men to find some timber and put it under the caterpillars. But the machine gun was firing at every move, and there was nothing on the slope but the tank and the soldiers, alive and dead. Those killed in yesterday's attacks were already frozen and hard as timber. So the sergeant ordered to use them as timber, to collect those fallen and tuck them under the caterpillars of the both sides of the tank, so it could finally move forward. After a short moment of hesitation, the soldiers obeyed. The tank went uphill, grinding the bodies of the dead into mush, and delivered a deadly shot. After retelling this part, my mother added, "He insisted the worst thing he remembers from war is that sound, very specific sound of the bodies cracking under the weight of tank. He heard it everywhere." It may seem that I'm trying to humanize the Soviet aggressors, to present their side. No, I'm not. Instead, I would like to draw your attention to one specific trait of the Russian or the Soviet Empire. This trait was already mentioned here today: the extremely low value of human life. This is not just an internal problem. In international relations, a low value of life is an indispensable currency of aggression, a natural resource of sorts, the raw material of war. For an aggressor it can buy, which nothing else can buy: time. Putin's army is an army of yesterday, and exactly this is its gruesome advantage. It can sustain losses that would be absolutely unacceptable for any Western country. But it also technologically advanced enough to counter Western military technologies. Western science was first to dronize warfare, to minimize the involvement of troops on the ground, and to use machines for the new tasks. Putin's army, while also using real drones, dronizes the human beings as well. It has turned soldiers into dispensable, single-use units, exactly the way the Soviets waged the war in the 20th century. With the Russia's full-scale invasion, we also entered the era of the global moral climate change. It is another very real, but not yet fully recognized, outcome of the war. Perhaps the most wide-ranging of all outcomes. With thousands of troops sent into battle, Putin doesn't just get some pieces of Ukrainian territory. He erodes the political landscape worldwide, upsets alliances, exhausts the patience of the voters in NATO countries, and drags us down to the hell of the moral relativism. What can be done about it? The old concept of politics of memory, related to the events of the 20th century and based on the minimization of the Soviet-Russian responsibility for the occupation of the large part of Europe, has already expired. At the latest, it did so in 2014, after the illegal annexation of Crimea and the invasion of Donbass. Western and Southwestern Europe, which never faced the reality of the Soviet occupation, must now hear the voice of those who experienced it firsthand. With this war comes an offer to make a deal with the devil, to sacrifice others to save yourself. As a KGB operative trained to break people, Putin knows that the road to complete surrender and moral failure begins with a small concession, a small betrayal of one's principles. Yes, the European Union was not built for war. It is easy for an aggressor to take advantage of the European Union internal imbalances and contradictions, of the fact that the bloody history of long Russian occupations was not fully integrated into common historical narrative. And it is hard to say whether it will be possible to hold Russia accountable for its crimes against Ukraine anytime soon. But to build a future at all, a real future, it will be paramount to develop a cultural and historical concept countering Russia's attempt to divide and rule. In doing so, August 23rd offers itself as a starting point. At the proposal of Václav Havel, Joachim Gauck, and other prominent former dissidents, August 23rd, the day when the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was signed, has been established as the European Union Day of Remembrance for the victims of the Stalinism and Nazism, or the Black Ribbon Day. The significance of that day could and should be drastically increased, and its meaning substantially deepened to include the broader perspective on Russian imperialism, which was the part of the Soviet communist policy, but has outlived it. We need to make this day the focus of a long-term, uncoordinated politics of remembrance, to strengthen existing institutions like the European Network of Remembrance and Solidarity, which includes mostly Eastern European countries. We must also build new ones, cross-continentally, that are able to carry the message to the South and the West, countering both left-wing and right-wing narrative that continue to make excuses for Russia. Furthermore, the whole attitude of the EU towards the Russian opposition should be defined by the latter's acceptance of the 23rd August as a day of mourning and atonement, by its willingness to break radically with the Soviet myth of European liberation, and to accept the grievances and recriminations of those Eastern European nations which are now hosting exiled Russians. The USSR collapsed because its artificial unity was enforced by violence and oppression. The European Union endurance depends on the persistence of its voluntary unity. But the unity is not given. It is a product of mutual knowledge and compassion and many cultural bridges connecting people. It is time to start building.
Thank you, Sergei. I will symmetrically not ask questions about your speech, because I think there's not much to add. I will ask about your writing, because the building of bridges, the building of understanding, is what you have urged us to do. But formulating narratives and writing is what you do. Your latest novel, The Lady of the Mine, in this novel you go to Donbass. Will you tell us a little bit about the starting point? What drove you to Donbass? It's a short talk, but what did you find there in terms of, when we're thinking about the narrative of the past being something that we should bring with us into the understanding the challenges of the future?
In a very short form, I was trying to find an answer for the question how the Russia, who always pretended and insisted that it is a stronghold of anti-fascism and anti-Nazism, ended up to be actually a fascist state. How this change of color happened. And all of a sudden, investigating the story of the flight MH17, which was shot down in the skies over the Donbass.
The Malaysian
Boeing, which was shot down by the Russian missile launcher. I found also the history beneath the layer, beneath the surface. Because Donbass actually is the eastern border of the Holocaust in Europe. It's not the Babin Yar in Kiev. It's the Donbass coal mines, which were used as a dumping sites for the bodies. And it's very eerie and a strange place, because when the Soviets came in 1944, I suppose, 43, they unsealed the mines, exhumed several bodies, and sealed the mines back with the concrete. Meaning, effectively, that for years, Soviets were covering for the Nazis, their bitter enemies, keeping this crime from being exposed. So I took this place. I mean, in mythology, always need an axis for the werewolf to turn.
But it's a very vertical construction. It's the bodies falling from the sky onto the bodies that are the bodies of Jews that are pressed into the mine shaft. And what in this narrative are we bringing with us? What kind of understanding does this give us? I'm tough with you now.
Yeah. The understanding is that when the world looked on Donbass in 2014, it was a very shallow view of, I don't know, industrial region with the, I don't know, specific industrial identity. While, in a way, it was the place with the paramount record of violence. And there are no place without the history. There are no place without the special fate. And in my opinion, in my perspective, this bombing was the signal to the world, which was not really looking there, that once this war will touch everyone, because the flight and the liner symbolized this, the unity of the world. But the signal was not well received.
Sergei, I would like to invite you to take a seat and Rosa to come up stage for our final short discussion. Please, in the middle, Sergei.
Yeah.
Rosa, one of your widely read novels that also became a film deals with a compartment in a train and a Finnish person traveling with a Russian person. And it's very much, it's praised and it's appreciated for its ability to listen to how these characters talk and interact with each other. And what Sergei has been speaking about is in a way also a sort of iron curtain of narrative that doesn't go where the other iron curtain went, but goes between Russia and all the countries that experienced its aggression during and after World War II. And that we tell the stories differently. And you have been traveling quite a lot. We have traveled in Russia, you and me, from Krasnoyarsk to Novosibirsk. Have you heard this difference? And with your special experience also of the Tornio Valley, what difference have you been hearing?
This is a very large question, but I have been living in United States, in Sweden, in Denmark, and also in Soviet Union. And I have learned that in every country, people are the same. We are the same. And of course, there are some cultural differences, but anyway, we have to remember that we are all Homo sapiens and we all are animals also. And so Finnish people are animals and Russian people are animals. And we try to in that novel, we try to make discussion, to know each other. And I have never, I feared, I was full of fear when I first time traveled to Murmansk when I was 15 years old. Because my parents thought that when I traveled there, so I never come back, and I was put in the labor camp in Siberia. And that was reality, not like a joke. But I went there, and I was 1 week in Murmansk, and I decided to learn Russian because my journey was fantastic. And after that, I have been traveling, and I'm not afraid of Russian people. I have to say that I love to travel. Of course, I'm tourist. I love to travel. I have a lot of Russian friends, and I lived there during the Brezhnev time. I have traveled during the Putin time. But this regime has nothing to do with those people. I can't tuomita. What is tuomita? Judge, yeah. I can't just Russian people because they have that kind of regime. And I can't just Americans because they have this kind of regime just now.
But I mean, if you encounter these differences of narrative, I was saying, I mean, Finland has one, you have grown up with one narrative, and the fear of your parents does not come from nowhere. How did you handle this? Is there any way to handle this difference in how we perceive the 20th century?
Yeah. I have studied all my life history, world history, Russian history, Finnish history, and I think that we can deal with these things when we have knowledge, and we have to have heart also, and we have to try to understand. And I believe in diplomacy, I believe in discussion, I don't believe in arms, because I think that we can't name anything which has been good with wars. But we can name a lot of things which have been developed during the peacetime. Now we have had long peacetime, 80 years peace. And when Finland was 100 years part of Russia, there was no wars in Finland. So we have to remember that peacetime is great time to develop our planet and the balance that we need with nature. So different stories, different narratives, but we can study these and get more information. Okay?
But I mean, you say, yes, I mean, when Finland was the Grand Duchy within the Russian Empire, it had its laws, it had its semi-independence. The occupied territories of Ukraine, they are not given anything. They are uprooted. So
I'm against war. I'm against liberating the territories. I'm against arms. But I want to say this, I only said this, that we didn't have any war during that 100 years when we were part of Russia. Because usually we name 160 terrible things what happened during that 100 years part of Russia. But in fact, there was a lot of development in Finland. And Charles also put a lot of money to develop Helsinki, Finnish society. We got university and so on. So we very easily forget the good things and we take only the bad things. But this is, this is not that I appreciate innovations, not at all.
Sergei, I mean, you grew up in the Soviet Union as a child with the narrative that you just described, the narrative of liberation. When did you encounter another narrative? When did you realize that there is another truth outside?
It would be easy to say when the transformative moment came.
Yeah.
It also, the writer's story, it was at the island of Gotland in Sweden, in the Baltic Center for Writers and Translators, late November 2013, when the Maidan was already gaining momentum in Ukraine. There were 11 authors there representing the countries of the Baltic region, some Eastern European countries. We had the evening with wine. And all of a sudden, because of the fireplace, because of remoteness, people started to share their family stories. And it was sort of a mediation for me because I realized that everyone's life in this room, the family life, the biography of the family, was exactly just crushed by the Soviet Union. Crushed by the same Soviet soldiers whom I, by my education, by my family loyalty, maybe not exactly thought to be the liberators, but with whom I had certain closeness, at least. And it was the powerful moment of collective transformation, because they were not pressing me. They were not accusing me. They were just sharing stories, and the writers can do. But this was the... And since then, I never was able to see, I don't know, people coming in the Russian cities in this immortal regiment of things, picking up the portraits of their grandfathers. I always had the feeling that I also see them by the eyes of people of Lithuania or the people of Poland. And this was the moment of absolute change.
If I may, from my own side, I mean, when I worked in Russia 15 to 20, I was a Swedish diplomat representing Swedish culture and society, but my maternal grandparents are from Lithuania. My mother grew up in what became Poland, in Wrocław. And when I was, and of course I never talked about this because it wasn't my role, but with some Russian friends. I mean, at some point when the Immortal Brigade was marching and the 9th of May, you know, when they dressed their children, 5-year-olds, 4-year-olds, as Red Army soldiers, as Chekists, proud that, you know, proud that their children will remember their grandfather's great liberation of Europe. I said when I was visiting my grandparents when they were removed from Lithuania to what was former German territory, and they lived there, I always said that in my childhood, sometimes you would see women with the eyes poked out. But the grown-ups would never tell me why. And I remember an older cousin telling me when I was 14, 15, that, you know, the Red Army was allowed to rape German women, as many as they wanted, how they wanted. But Polish women, they were supposed to be the future socialist brother nation, so you couldn't rape them. So you would put out the eyes of one woman and then gang rape her, the whole regiment. And it was then, and when I said, you know, when you're carrying these people like saints, it's not that we cannot talk. Let's sit down and talk. We all are humans, like you're saying, Rosa. We can talk about the suffering that I was traded, the suffering you were traded. But if you make these people into saints, some of them raped these women. And the Russians would cover their ears because they couldn't take this in, because they are the liberators. They're the source of moral power. And claiming that they were mass raping women, looting civilians, all of this, it's just impossible.
Let me just add something, because what we really need, we need the balance in sharing, because I do understand that maybe 100 years being part of the Russian Empire could be perceived as a sort of a golden age. But empire was big in this 100 years. And what happened in the other end of empire was the brutal conquest of Caucasus, with the real genocides, several genocides coming, genocides of Cherkessians, for example, with the scorched earth policy of the Russian troops, wiping out village by village by village. And this is the same empire, and this is the same emperors doing so. And the problem is that as a Russian, I would gladly hear you saying this was the golden age.
Not golden age, but there were good.
There was something good there.
Yeah, something good.
Let's agree on that. And I will be deaf and not willing to listen to the Chechens, for whom this same period was the period of long-lasting suffering. And the question is how we bring this together.
Yeah.
How we bring this together.
And I think this is the question we must leave everyone with. And if I may express a gratitude to the organizers, it's the gratitude that I was given the task to moderate two very different angles, two different voices that are leaving us with no answers. They are leaving us with this enormous task of bringing the 20th century together so that we can do something good with the 21st. And the 20th century is there to deal with. We need to deal with it and bring it with us into the 21st. And with this, I would like to thank Rosa Liksom and Sergei Lebedev for sharing